Supergirl, Women of Tomorrow, issue 1, Tom King writing with Bill Evely on the art. This is an 8-issue mini, one of Tom King's more prestige style books, which is becoming kind of his trademark at DC. And the premise of this is probably a little different than I think most people were expecting, which is it's about this alien girl, this alien, maybe teenager, early teens, whose father was killed on a sort of fairly savage planet where, because he was outspoken about his opinion of the local king, one of the king's men just killed him in cold blood, and she is determined to seek revenge, and she wants to hire a killer to hunt down this guy and kill him. And in doing so, she ends up running into Supergirl, who is on this planet because there's a red sun, and she wants to get drunk for her 21st birthday because she's never had alcohol before. At least, never had the effects of alcohol before. Maybe more accurate.
Right, because of the Kryptonian stuff. Sorry to say that Superman just usually drinks celebratory, but you'll never see him drunk because his body metabolizes the alcohol so fast under yellow sun. So that's kind of our starting point. And then, because Supergirl beats up this thug quite easily in the pub, in the little tavern, because it's very much an alien western. I think that's very clear. I mean, even the plot is very True Grit. So I was about halfway reading it and it wasn't clicking with me, but that should come as no surprise because most of the time, first issue Tom King stuff doesn't click with me automatically. Rorschach really is the only one that I could feel first being like, this is exactly for me. And it was James. I was complaining about it on Twitter, being like, this is not working for me. I'm a little disappointed because it was super hyped. And he goes, it's basically True Grit. What's to not like? And then it clicked with me, and it made me like it less because it's so unabashedly True Grit, just with Kara and the Rooster Cogburn part. And I get that, but to me, the part that makes Rooster work, especially in the Coen Brothers, I've never seen the original John Wayne one, but I very much liked the Coens True Grit. But what made Rooster work so much for me was that he was this world-weary guy that was kind of seen it all, and he's just over it. And so he doesn't care about manners. The world is a bitter, mean place, and you got to take it out before it takes you out. That's not Supergirl to me. So maybe King's going to play with that a little bit.
To be fair, I think that is kind of the point, is that, well, we're saying that we can transplant the story and say it's based on a True Grit framework. Obviously, there's big differences between who Supergirl is and that character, because Supergirl's thing here is not, I'm grumpy and want you to go away. Supergirl's thing is, I'm not a hitman. I'm kind of a superhero. I don't kill people. Also, I've got like a world to go back and like help saving. Like she's sort of like pushing her away, but for very different reasons.
Right, but for me, Supergirl would even like try to comfort this girl that lost her dad, and it's never that. It's very much get away from me. I'm not a hitman, and so that just felt off for Kara.
I agree it does. I think, though, the fact that she's went to another planet to get drunk on her birthday on her own tells me that she's not in a great place, because this is a character who's a little bit further ahead than perhaps we've seen recently.
Right.
So,
and that's why I said it's the first issue, right? But again, before being enlightened that it's basically True Grit, and once I saw that, and then I saw the formula, I was like, oh man. Now I kind of know what to expect. I
have to imagine that it'll go in different places than True Grit.
I hope so.
But also, the big part of this is going to be discovering why Kara is where she is mentally. Why is she like this right now? I don't have a problem with the premise per se. It's definitely a little bit different because you spend half the issue before you even get to see her. Really, I mean, it's very poignant or noted that in the opening couple of pages, King makes a point of having the main character here. She talks about she mentions Supergirl by name and sort of like teases the ending of the story a little bit. Says, "But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the start." And I think that's to make it clear to all of us that, oh no, don't worry, Supergirl's coming and she's going to be a big part of this story. And obviously she's going to be. It's her book, right? It's called Supergirl. Right. But just to appease anyone who gets concerned that we're spending pages and pages like introducing these new characters and who they are. And I think we're going to have this story where this bond between this character, whose name I have no idea what her name is. With Supergirl. There's a lot of potential there in that bond, just like in True Grit or something like The Last of Us or something like the relationship Supergirl has with this girl and ultimately like finding herself again, I would assume, is going to kind of be the heart of this book. And the idea that Supergirl doesn't have her powers because it's a red sun, and we see that she gets shot with multiple arrows by the end of the issue and there's blood coming out and all sorts.
But she also kind of no-sells it at one point, so I feel like the Red Sun's effects aren't, like what we normally see with the Red Sun stuff, where it completely robs them.
It's not 100%.
It just slows her down.
But I think it's trying to show that she's still a badass. Like, it doesn't matter that she doesn't have like all of her complete powers. I mean, there's that funny moment in the bar where she gets like punched and she's like, "Oh yeah, that's right. I'm actually going to get hurt and bleed here." That's a poor choice, all things considered. Because I really like the moment, because Supergirl's like trying to not care. She's trying to not get attached to this girl. And there's a moment at the end when she's trying to talk her out, because she's about to leave on the ship, and she's talking to the girl and saying, like, don't be a killer. Is this wrong? Don't do that. I have to go. You can't come with me. And it's when the girl, says, you don't understand. Like, losing my father, I lost my whole world. And there's just that moment. And Supergirl's like, the art's really good there because like evilly captures like Kara kind of saying, "Oh, I just related to that."
Yeah, the art is top notch. Like it's evilly. We all know how much I love Bilquis Evely's art, so that went without saying. The expressions, especially here.
Like I've seen a lot of people be lukewarm on this issue, and while I don't think it's a knockout issue like the first issue of Rorschach or Mr. Miracle, where I do think it's a better first issue than Batman Catwoman, which I'm also really liking now after once it's gotten going. And I don't have to even compare it to Heroes in Crisis. I think we all know how we stand on that.
That's his big whiff. But like in my experience with King, I know not to just write it off after the first issue by now. But again, I don't know if it's just I overhyped this one because it is King's Supergirl, and I had that image as my background forever once this book was announced, right? So
I think the key thing when it comes to a new King book coming out is that maybe it does work better with some of the characters who are maybe less central to your fandom. So Adam Strange and Mr. Miracle. Well, you've maybe liked those characters before. They're not like the big heavy hitters of DC that you have a lot of opinions on. So you're a bit more open to like a different take. You're open to this darker place he's putting them in. You're open to the trauma he's putting them through. And what in turn happens is that by the time you get to the end of the story, all of a sudden you're way more of a Mr. Miracle fan than you ever were before. You're way more of an Adam Strange fan than perhaps you ever were before. By the end of that, I mean, we're not quite got to the end of that yet, but in theory, I probably would say that I am going to be more of an Adam Strange fan at the end of that than I was at the start of it.
I would say Mr. Terrific. I feel like
Mr. Terrific, yeah.
Yeah, like he's very good at deconstructions, and again, that's why I'm not rushing to be like, oh, this was bad, because I don't say it was bad. It didn't resonate in the way, and I just feel like Kara feels off. But I'm sure there's going to be explanations. I think so. It's not a total. I'm not going to torpedo the book.
Yeah, I think Kara only feels a little off, and it felt like she was becoming more Kara-esque, or at least she was becoming a more recognizable Kara through. Well, a mood, I suppose, is maybe the best way to say it. Like, by the time we got to the end, it was starting to sound more like Kara, but a Kara who was very disgruntled, a Kara who has become disheartened by recent events. And it wouldn't surprise me if King does bring in, like, the Rogol Zar stuff a little bit, and, like, the experience of losing Kandor and whatever else, if that sort of feeds into things a little bit. But I will say, I've seen a lot of people be lukewarm on this, and I think part of it is because it's such a specific type of story that I don't think anyone was really expecting from what a Supergirl book could be. And I think as a first issue on its own, if you take away, if you didn't know this was going to exist and you just sat down and read this first issue, and you just sort of get introduced to this character, which I think it does a good job of telling, because this is a more conventional story than these other big prestige books. I don't think this isn't jumping around and being kind of like a psyche piece in the same way that Mr. Miracle or Strange Adventures or Rorschach does.
It's more of a straight up adventure.
Yeah.
At this point. Yeah.
And honestly, I think it's a solid first issue in presenting its story. I don't think it's what most people expected of it, and therefore there's almost like I need to wait and sort of have it be proven like what the hook of the story is.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that hook isn't quite there yet because it's still just setting up the True Grit style side of it. But I was getting some feelings towards the end, but once Kara was starting to relate to this girl, the idea that this girl might bring out Kara's heart again in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Now, admittedly, did we have a story before that would put Kara in this place? The last time we really had anything with Kara on her own was when she was just getting over being taken over from the Batman stuff when she was Jokerized. Mm-hmm. So maybe that'll play into like maybe some of the reasoning. Maybe King will use that.
That could be too. But yeah, it seemed off, and when it comes to the super characters, I feel like trying to make them, have this kind of don't bother me edge. It always rings hollow for me just because of who they are for the most part.
I think it works better with Kara because Kara's I think traditionally had a bit more of an attitude than Clark has.
But even then, like this girl's like, I'm not a hitman, but I feel like she should have been like, how else can I help you? And there wasn't that moment. There wasn't that like, what's your other option? And the girl goes, no, I'm not going to rest until this man is dead.
Which I think,
okay, I can't help.
And I think that what you're just saying there, I think that's the key thing that is missing, but I think it's intentionally missing. I think that's the whole point of the story is that Kara's, I mean, I'll just say she's lost her mojo for lack of a better term. And, and it's going to be her refinding her mojo. And maybe some people...
I hope so.
And maybe some people say, oh, King's put her in this place at the start of the story so he can tell a story about her getting her groove back. But, I mean, so many stories, so many movies, so many everything start with a character in a bad place so they can tell the story. And it's because it's a comic book and because it's a character who's pre-established that people... Like, it's okay to cut into the middle of where a character is to tell a story of how they get out of it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, especially when this is a character who's not... If she's had an ongoing book right now, and it was still going on, and this was meant to take place like sort of alongside or right after it ended, or whatever, I can maybe see the critique, but she's been kind of missing for a while, so like there's room to explore, okay, why has she gotten herself into a bad place? Why is she so disillusioned right now? Because when she says I need to go back and be a hero, it does sound a little cynical. It sounds like, okay, that's what I'm doing because that's what I've always been doing, but it's not that her heart's in it right now. So I'm curious, and I feel like I'm being not defensive, maybe I am, but I feel like I've seen the general reaction on social media be a little bit kind of down on it, and I went into it having already had that in my mind, so I kind of went in going, okay, am I going to be as disappointed as everyone else seems to be? And I kind of read it and went, there was nothing wrong with this, really. There's maybe some like nitpicky moments with dialogue or something that you could maybe point to, but
yeah, I ignored all that stuff and just went into it, and it was, I'm more picky when it comes to super characters. So, and again, it's King and Evely. I have high expectations. So when it didn't, hit those high expectations, again, that's what I mean. I would never say this is bad though, or tell people not to read it. Because again, it's the first issue. If this keeps up and we're halfway through, right, on 4 out of 8 or whatever, then I would have more of a bone to pick. But again, it's the first issue. I'm not going to go that hard and rail against it. It's just this is stuff that didn't work for me.
To go with my previous statement of how by the end of Mr. Miracle, I think most of us were way more Mr. Miracle fans than we were before. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised, because obviously the one big exception to that is Heroes in Crisis, where it screwed the pooch on Wally, right, and the characterization of Wally. But it wouldn't surprise
for most of the characters in that book.
Let me finish my point though. I wouldn't be surprised that if this ends up being much like Mr. Miracle, where people who give this a chance and stick with it might actually end up loving Kara more by the end, because she goes through a hard time and sort of comes out on the other end feeling more Supergirl than she's ever done before, or going through a rite of passage. Because one of the things that I think some of the side characters for certain the major characters can suffer, like Supergirl or like a Batgirl or like whoever, is that they kind of get trapped by being attached to the other character and not having their own story and journey, by not having their own arch nemesis, not having their own times that we can kind of point to and say that was their thing. And they don't have enough of their own solo, because Superman and Batman, there's so many single trades and collections and stories we can point to and say those are the defining stories of those characters. And I don't know if some of these characters like Supergirl have as many of those specifically. They have runs that we enjoy, they have things that we really like, but I don't know if there's the one that I would probably give to someone, which is very out of continuity, obviously, but is Being Super, because it's a really good standalone Supergirl story. But this could have the potential of being a very defining moment in Kara's early life that we could use later to say, hey, that is a really good standalone Supergirl story but does fit into continuity and does inform part of how we see the character later. And maybe I'm being optimistic there, but there's nothing in this issue that makes me doubt that can be the case. I think this is a solidly told first issue with good art. Leaves us in a bit of a cliffhanger. I'm assuming you got really upset when Krypto got an arrow to the neck.
Very upset, but again, Red Sun. I'm sure it's not.
I'm sure he'll be fine. Yeah,
he'll be fine.
I don't think he's killing Krypto.
Then I'm gonna burn shit down. So.
Tom King's not ready for the wrath of the internet if he kills Krypto.
No. This is not Scott Snyder and horses. All right?
Yes.
So. Yes.
But I did like the conversation between Kara and the girl at the end quite a bit. And I think there's also a nice examination of okay, so she says she lost her world when her father was killed, but she has 5 brothers and a mom, but her mom's very dismissive of it. And I like the idea that one person, even though she's surrounded by other family members, she can feel like she's lost her world, even though she hasn't literally done that, whereas Kara has literally lost her world. I think that's an interesting comparison to make.
So what I read from that is she's the only girl in a family of brothers, right? And so her dad treated her special, and that she was the one that stood out for her dad because of this. And so that's why the loss of dad, the boys have just kind of accepted this is the world they live on, where she's like, well, why? They killed dad. We have to go get vengeance.
And I think
their whole thing is oh, well, that's just the world. And she's like, why does it have to be?
Yeah, and
so
I think
she's the one that's questioning,
that fire, I think, is also something that thematically ties to Supergirl. The idea that everyone else is too scared to act or thinks they shouldn't bother, and she's the one who says, no, I'm going to, even though I am a teenage girl who clearly can't take this guy in a fight, I'm going to somehow find a way of doing this. She has that energy. I think that does kind of tie to Supergirl. Aside from the murderous revenge part, but I mean, that's a character lesson to learn. And it is worth mentioning at the start of the book, she does refer to Supergirl as having the killing blow on the guy they're hunting. I'm sure there's going to be a swerve there.
Yeah.
Or at least if it does happen, it's going to be extremely, built up and justified in a sort of big dramatic moment that'll have consequences.
Well, is it this guy, as of right now, has 0 redeeming qualities?
Oh yeah, he's a complete shitbag, yeah.
Yeah. So, and not to say that makes him worthy of Kara's wrath, but are we sure she's talking about Kara at that point? That's my swerve. Is
that could be a swerve?
How do we know this is? How do we know that this is not? This girl becomes Superwoman.
Yeah.
In her own way. So.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning the guy they're chasing actually gets into Kara's ship, which is on set to take off. So he actually takes off from the planet at the end, as Kara and Krypto are both lying there with arrows in them and bleeding and hurting. But there's some nice little touches. I kind of like the whole moment where Supergirl sort of leaves her behind and she goes in the little boat and we're left behind with the girl, and she just sort of narrates and says, if I hadn't followed her that day, this could have happened and that could have happened, but I did follow her. And she jumps in. So again, it's that determination of never giving up, which is making her a little bit endearing, as flawed as her reasons might be.
Yeah, I like how she swims and keeps up with the boat. It's just that whole I'm not gonna stop, so you might as well help me. I like that.
It builds a character. I think that's the thing. See, if you forget that this is a Supergirl book you were looking forward to, it does a decent job of building the character and all. So Yeah, I like the first issue. Is it as good as like any recent issues of Strange Adventures of or Rorschach? No,
Mm-mm.
it isn't. But I liked it quite a bit, and I liked it, more than some other books, and more than at least another book that I read this week. So yeah, um, I'm feeling optimistic and positive about it. So all right, what you giving?
I'm gonna give this a 7.5.
Yeah, I think I'll go a nudge higher and give it the 8. I would say I like the issue. I'm looking forward to seeing it develop and hoping it gets more into the meat of the character drama.
Yeah, seeing some of the more negative takes on it was a little bit disheartening, just because it's like it's issue 1. Let's give it some breathing room before we start.
Sure.
Yeah. But yeah, I just a tad disappointed. And then when I realized it was just the opening part of True Grit, I kind of got annoyed that I didn't figure it out for myself. So, yeah.
Yeah. And because I think because Carrot is a very different person, that's where it's going to pivot and like going out. Like I'm sure there'll be similar beats in some ways. I mean, maybe this kid will lose an arm. I don't know, but spoilers for True Grit, I guess. But yeah. But I mean, yeah, I'm curious to see how the rest of it plays out.